Good evening and welcome into our home. The wall behind me is our family wall. It is the wall that has pictures of about 4 to 5 different generations of us through the years. One of the pictures that is up there, this picture right there, is my dad's senior year in high school. I want to talk a little bit about my dad tonight. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease when he was only 36 years old. And I was 6 years old at that time. I remember very vividly sitting at the Carlsons. They were family friends of ours. They were watching me while my dad and my mom went to the doctor that day. And when my parents came back to pick me up and shared the news, I just remember all of them crying and talking and just the emotion that was in that moment. As a 6-year-old, it didn't make much sense to me. I had no idea what this disease was. I had no idea what was going to happen to my dad. I just knew that whatever it was, they were really upset. It took me until my adulthood to realize just how scared my mom and dad would have been at that point. My dad not only worried about his life and his future, but obviously his wife and his child and their future. How were we going to get by as a family if he couldn't work after a little while? There are 3 times throughout that childhood and into adulthood with my dad that stand out the most for me through the years. The first one was when my dad got to a point where he couldn't drive anymore. I was in high school and my mom had this wonderful idea. My dad was actually due for his license to be renewed and he had to go for the test. So my mom's idea was, well, this is perfect. There's no way he's going to pass the test. It will be the state of Illinois that took his license away, not us. So we drove him over to the IDOT building and he was trying to get to the counter. His legs weren't really working anymore. He really couldn't make his way to the counter. And the lady walked over to him and said, "Sir, what is the matter?" And he explained he had Parkinson's disease and he needed to use a walker or wheelchair most of the time, that his legs just didn't work anymore. And she managed to turn around and say, "Well, that's okay, we will skip the driving test tonight and just go ahead and pass you." And I'm sitting over in the corner listening to this and thinking, I got docked on my own driving test for not pulling up on a parallel parking job close enough to the curb. But my dad, who can't press the brake, that's no problem. My mom was so upset, we had to take his license away from him the very next morning, and he was not a happy camper. I remember that so well. I also remember the night that we had to put him into a nursing home. My mom was actually in the hospital herself, sick, and it had reached a point where my dad just needed 24-hour care every single day. It was me who had to put him into the nursing home. I was only in my mid-20s at that time. I remember that day vividly, dropping him off, sitting with him, holding his hand, listening to my dad say, "Please don't leave." I couldn't stay forever, obviously. I told him I'd be back the next morning. I went home with tears in my eyes too. And my friend Joe came over and sat with me for 3 or 4 hours that night, and we just reminisced memories of my dad through the years. The last night that I remember very vividly was the night that I had to sit with my dad in the nursing home and tell him that this was it. He only had a couple days to live, and holding his hand and the two of us crying together and reminding him that soon he would be restored, he would be in God's kingdom, he would see my mom again. Those days stand out because of the love that existed in them, the love of friends sitting with my parents as they went through this terrible moment of being told what my dad actually had as a disease. The moment of my mom saying to my dad, "I love you, I am taking your license away because I want you to be safe." And the forgiveness and understanding that was in my dad's eyes through his tears in those moments. The night of putting my dad in a nursing home, holding his hand and the tears that we shared together. And then my friend Joe and I reminiscing at home, again crying and laughing at the same time. And then of course the love of a father and a son in those final days, holding hands with each other again and just crying together and just sitting in the silence together. That love was so powerful. It informs who I am. It informed my dad, it informed my mom, and I think it even informs who my kids are today. My dad's worry wasn't about himself. It wasn't about his own life and what he was losing. He was actually grieving what he would never get to see in my life and in his grandchildren's lives. It is that love that runs so deep within us, God's love planted in our hearts, which we share with each other within a family. We are made in the image of God. What that means is that we are made in the image of God's love. And therefore, it is that love that we reflect and that we share and that gets passed down from generation to generation to generation. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 8 says, love never ends. It really doesn't. My dad has now been gone for 19 years, but his love lives on in my heart and lives in every story that I share with everyone about him. And that love will be passed down from generation to generation. We live in love. We are the reflection of God's love. Go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.